Live from Washington, I'm Aisha Tanzim and you're watching Access Point. Hello and welcome. President Barack Obama has ordered Pentagon to formally plan for a complete withdrawal from Afghanistan by the end of this year. The zero troops option, once viewed as a bluff to pressure President Hamid Karzai to sign a bilateral security agreement, now seems real, albeit reluctantly. NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen has made it very clear that without a BSA with the US, the NATO status of force agreement cannot go ahead either, and Afghanistan will lose NATO troops as well.
If we don't get the legal framework in place, then we can't deploy, and then we will have to withdraw everything by the end of this year.
Trying to add pressure on President Karzai, other NATO defense ministers chimed in as well.
Karzai is playing with fire, and NATO is committed, as always, but we have to be invited to continue our resolute support mission.
How does this change the situation on the ground in Afghanistan? Let's find out from our guests. Lisa Curtis is a senior research fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Lisa, welcome to Access Point.
Thank you for having me.
So let me ask you, when we talked about the zero troops option, when it was first put on the table, a lot of people said this is a bluff, the White House cannot be seriously considering it. Are they now seriously considering it?
Yeah, I think it's clear that the zero troops option, the chances for that coming about are increasing. And we saw that with President Obama, telling President Karzai over the phone on Tuesday that he had ordered the U.S. military to plan for this option. He still left a bit of a space or a possibility for negotiating a bilateral security agreement with Karzai's successor. But he made clear that this was a real possibility that the U.S. could in fact go to zero troops. And we know that if the U.S. does not leave any residual forces in Afghanistan, the NATO countries won't either. And I think one of the problems is that the NATO countries need more lead time than the US in terms of their planning for future deployments. So this is the problem that we're facing now, that even if the US could wait a couple of more months to make its decision on the number of troops, the NATO countries may not have that luxury.
Why is President Karzai doing this? What is he trying to get out of not signing the BSA?
Well, I think he calculates this is his last piece of leverage before the elections. He can't run in the elections. He's barred from running in the elections, but he does want to keep some position of power within Kabul, even after the elections. I think that's quite clear. So the way he calculates is, this plays well politically in Afghanistan, holding out against the U.S., gets him some points. It keeps him relevant is probably his calculation. But of course, if you look at the bigger picture, he's putting his country in danger, because if the BSA cannot be reached in a timely fashion and the U.S. were to pull out altogether, then obviously you're looking at a very insecure, unstable situation. You're looking at U.S. aid levels going down. So if you look at the big picture, he's putting his own country in danger. But unfortunately, I think his tactical political goal is just to remain relevant. And this is his last piece of leverage that he holds on to.
Some people suggested that he may be worried about his legacy, that he does not want to be viewed as a U.S. tout when he leaves the administration. But if he does this, and as you say, he puts his country in danger, what will then his legacy be?
I think that's a great question, because in my opinion, he has already put his legacy in danger. If he really did care about his legacy, he's certainly not going to have a good international legacy. He has blown that, I think, the way he has acted over the last 6 months. It's not only the refusal to sign the BSA. He has blamed NATO forces for attacks on civilians that were proved that it wasn't NATO forces that killed these civilians. He has criticized the U.S. on every occasion that he has gotten in the last few months. So he's really alienated the Western partners. So if he was hoping to have some kind of international legacy, I think that's simply out of the question. Whether or not, Afghans respect him for standing up to the U.S., this is something we'll have to watch for. But, like I said, if the U.S. and NATO forces completely pull out, the country destabilizes, then yes, I don't think he'll have any kind of legacy or one that he would want.
Now, is there any support inside Afghanistan for standing up to the U.S.? Because every other presidential candidate is promising that they'll sign the PSA. The big lawyer Jirga that Karzai hoped would say not to sign it actually recommended that he signs it. So within Afghanistan, is it like 50-50? Are there at least half the population saying, good for you, go for it? Or most people are against it?
I'm not sure what the breakdown is, but I do know, I have heard that going up against the U.S. does get him some political points with certain parts of the population. I don't know what the percentage is, but there is a certain support that he gets for taking that kind of position. But you're right, all of the other election candidates have said they support U.S. and NATO forces staying on past 2014. The Loya Jirga, 3,000 tribal elders also voted in favor of keeping troops on the ground. And I think the problem is that when you talk to Afghans, they just assume that since it's in the U.S. interest to keep troops there, that the troops will stay. But what they're failing to understand is that there are people in the White House who do not favor keeping troops on the ground in Afghanistan. Vice President Biden, for example, has been vocal about his support for pulling all U.S. troops out and relying simply on special forces teams, drone strikes to take care of the counterterrorism issue. So I think there is a failure to understand within Afghanistan the fact that there are many in the White House who want to pull out altogether. And so for them, what Karzai is doing is an advantage for them. They can take advantage of his obstinance to sign and use it as an excuse to pull out altogether. And I think it's really, a shame that more Afghans don't realize the path that Karzai is leading them down.
Tell me something. The Pentagon seems very willing to leave forces there and also almost unwilling to have a zero troops option because they fought a war for the last 13 years. The U.S. has spent about $700 billion in it. They've lost 2,000 U.S. troops there. They don't want it to end badly. Why is the White House reluctant to leave 10,000 troops there, which is the Pentagon's choice?
Well, I think President Obama would like to be seen as the president that ended 2 wars for the U.S. I think that he simply is not convinced that even leaving 10,000 troops will make a difference in Afghan security. So unfortunately, and this came out in Bob Gates' memoirs, President Obama is not confident in the U.S. strategy in Afghanistan. He has major doubts about the U.S. ability to play a positive stabilizing role in the country. So I think that is what explains his reluctance to keep 10,000 troops, which is certainly what the military favors. And I think when the military said we should leave 10,000 troops or none at all, they're signaling their frustration with the White House position, which has been to fail to give any number. I think the White House has created a lot of uncertainty in the Afghans' mind because they have not come up with a number that they would like to see remain in Afghanistan.
Well, I'm very happy that David Sedney, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Central Asia, could finally join us. David, welcome to Access Point.
Thank you very much.
We're talking about President Barack Obama ordering Pentagon to start planning for a possible complete withdrawal from Afghanistan and what the repercussions might be. What I wanted to ask you was that every presidential candidate in Afghanistan has indicated they're willing to sign it. But the elections are in April. There's the possibility of a runoff. We may not find until mid-May or even later who their next president is. How does that impact the whole situation?
I don't think it impacts it very much. As you said, the vast majority of the presidential candidates, all the realistic candidates, have said that they will sign the BSA. There's only 5 weeks until the election. Once that election happens, it'll be clear who at least the two final candidates will be. There will be some planning going on, as President Obama directed, but I don't think, as I said, I don't think it's very relevant. I think everyone knows what the parameters are. The most important thing really is, what do the Afghan people want? And the Afghan people, through the Loya Jirga, through their presidential candidates, and the Afghan security forces have made clear that they really value and want American forces and NATO forces and our partner forces to stay. So I think it's going to happen. It's just a question of how effectively it happens.
Okay, so some of those bases need almost 10 months to wind up. So in terms of planning, if, for example, the White House knows that it's going to get signed further down the line, NATO needs even longer to plan. Do you think they're planning to stay at this point?
They're planning to stay, but they're also planning to leave. But nothing really takes 10 months. It takes 10 months to do it the right way. But if you do it more quickly, it just takes longer. It takes more money, and you do a worse job of it. So we would like to have more time, but if we don't, we'll survive. And the most important thing will be the commitment after President Karzai for continued support from the U.S. and NATO.
So, Lisa, talk about commitment. If there are less U.S. forces and less NATO forces, or if, worst case scenario, there's a zero troops option, what does that do to the commitment to continue putting money in a country where there are no forces?
Well, I think that U.S. aid levels would almost certainly go down because if you have U.S. troops there in the region, there's a lot of focus. There is more interest, there's more support on Capitol Hill for keeping up large-scale aid. And also there's the issue of being able to monitor effectively that aid, which I think there's a comfort level. If you have forces on the ground, there's some sense that there's a bit more secure environment, there's more ability to monitor that aid, make sure it's going to the right places. But if we have a complete pullout of forces, then there's going to be reluctance to continue the high levels of aid to Afghanistan that we've seen over the last several years. And one of the most important funding streams is, of course, to the Afghan security forces. But if we don't have anybody on the ground to provide the training, the advice, I think it's going to be more difficult to argue to keep those funding levels up. But another issue that we need to look at is the regional players. If the U.S. and NATO forces do, in fact, pull out altogether, what will their reactions be? What will Russia do? What will India do? What will Iran do? What will China do? And I think that is becoming more of a question and increasingly important because that will determine what direction Afghanistan goes in.
David, do you think if a BSA is not signed until midsummer, that the likelihood of, if not zero troops, then less troops, 3,000 as opposed to 10,000, what's the likelihood of that?
As I said, I don't think there's much likelihood the BSA won't be signed. The real people who will suffer in a delay in the BSA are the Afghan people, because, as Lisa said, the other actors, particularly the Taliban, they're the ones who are out there killing Afghan civilians. They're killing Afghan women and killing Afghan girls. More Afghan civilians will die unless the BSA is signed soon. The longer the delay, the more Afghan civilians will get killed because the less support the Afghan security forces will have. That's the real issue here. Not the issue of exact numbers of troops.
So building on that issue, is this sending a message to the Taliban and maybe to Al-Qaeda that the civil war post-2014 withdrawal that they probably foresee is now going to be bloodier and they have a better chance of regaining whatever they wanted to regain?
I'm not sure the Taliban really believe they have much of a chance of regaining in the near term because the Afghan security forces over the last 12 months have done a very good job of defeating the Taliban in just about every engagement. The Taliban have lost ground over the last 12 months, not gained it. But what the Taliban are capable of doing is sowing distrust and fear by using IEDs to kill civilians. And so more civilians will get killed if the Taliban have their way.
Do you agree, Lisa, that Taliban are not likely to regain any ground?
Well, again, I think that this depends on several factors over the next year. One is how many forces the U.S. and NATO leave in the country, and the more forces that are left, I think the greater chance there is to backstop the Afghan security forces. How much funding will continue to flow to the Afghan security forces? This is also a major issue. Another issue is how well do the elections go? Do the Afghan people see the elections as credible? Does it bring forth a cohesive government, even if it's a coalition government, but is there faith in that government to carry on? And three is what the regional countries decide to do, and one of those countries is Pakistan. And right now we see what looks like the beginnings of a military operation in North Waziristan, directed primarily at the Pakistani Taliban, but we have yet to see whether there is an impact on the Afghan Taliban, the Haqqani network, and how that plays out. So there, are several different factors, but I do think that there is a chance. If all of these factors go in a negative direction, the elections don't go so well, the U.S. doesn't keep up the funding as much as it should, and the groups that are based in Pakistan, the Haqqani network, and the Afghan Taliban remain powerful, then yes, I think the Taliban stands a chance to start regaining territory in the south. I think the Haqqani forces start to, regain territory in the east, and you have a situation that, is increasingly back to what we saw pre-9/11, and where you see not only the Taliban gaining influence, but as they gain influence, giving more space, more opportunities for training, basing of other terrorist groups, whether it be the Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan, the IMU, whether it be the Lashkar-e-Taiba, which focuses on India. So I think we're looking at a very dangerous situation, and the decisions that are made within the next 6 to 9 months are really critical.
Is Al Qaeda even part of this calculation, or does the U.S. think it's dismantled enough that that doesn't have to be seriously considered when they're calculating risk?
Al Qaeda continues to be the main factor in the calculation. Al Qaeda leaders are still in the border areas of Pakistan, in the federally administered tribal areas in Pakistan. And it's really up to the government of Pakistan to ensure that the Al Qaeda leaders are not active, and I hope that this reported operation is able to do that. More broadly, I would say that I would agree with Lisa on the elections point. The elections are the key issue. In 2004, Pakistani security forces did a very good job of reducing the level of infiltration across the border, and the 2004 elections were relatively secure. In 2009, we did not see any of that type of activity. And sadly, the level of violence during the 2009 elections was much higher than before after the elections. There was a real serious issue regarding that. So over the next 5 weeks, we'll see just how effective Pakistani security forces are at keeping the insurgents from coming across the border into Afghanistan and disrupting the elections. And if the elections are reasonably peaceful, there will be some violence. But if they're reasonably peaceful, the Afghan people will turn out, I think, in the way the Pakistani people turned out in the Pakistani elections last year, where many people thought the Pakistani elections would not be very successful, and I think they turned out to be a triumph for the Pakistani people. I think the Afghan elections have the same potential to be a triumph for the Afghan people on April 5th this year.
Now, you've mentioned the safe havens in Pakistan for the Haqqanis and some of the top Al-Qaeda leadership. The U.S. and Afghanistan has been literally banging their heads against the wall and alleging that these safe havens need to end. But recently we've seen a new phenomena that Pakistan's alleging safe havens on the Afghan side, and recently the 23 FC personnel killed were allegedly killed on Afghan soil, not on Pakistani soil. So if this operation happens and the top Al-Qaeda leadership all flee to the Afghan side of the border, then how could this operation be successful?
Well, the key to preventing that is cooperation among all the forces involved, cooperation between the Afghan and Pakistani militaries, and cooperation with the international security forces, even though they don't do very much fighting anymore. And that level of cooperation, that level of common operational knowledge, common operational tactics, that has been lacking in recent years. However, I think there are some signs that it may begin to open up. But in order to prevent the phenomena you're describing, the most important thing is cooperation effective cooperation between the Pakistani and Afghan militaries.
Now, Pakistani government officials have also alleged, when they were talking about this operation, some foreign interference in helping these militant groups. India, of course, is one of the normal ones, but they also said that, U.S. may be providing monetary support to some groups to some certain ends that they did not identify. I'm wondering, and they definitely mentioned Afghan intelligence, and they've mentioned that on the record.
Any suggestion that the United States is involved the way you say is absolutely ridiculous. There's no evidence for that. In my former job, I had a lot of discussions with Pakistanis on that who would make such vague claims, but they never had any evidence for it. So it's patently ridiculous to say such a thing. In terms of others, help, I've never seen any evidence of it. And the fact that these people have been in Pakistan for over a decade makes it clear that the real problem is the ability of Pakistan to exercise effective sovereignty over its own territory. And the more Pakistan can exercise that effective sovereignty, the safer everybody will be.
Now, because Pakistan says that so often, I'm going to ask you this question again. Has Pakistan ever shared with the U.S., when you were in your former job, any evidence that Afghan intelligence or Indian intelligence was involved in the border areas on the Afghanistan side, helping TTP or any militant organizations that were operating on Pakistan?
No, never any evidence. They would show us stories in Pakistani newspapers, but unfortunately those stories were not evidence. But they never gave us any evidence, no.
Nothing that
Nothing.
you'd call actionable?
Nothing.
So these, at least in your opinion, are just claims?
I think they're just claims. I think there's a unfortunate historical tendency in Pakistan to blame India for everything. I've never seen any evidence of the Indians being involved in this. The real issue here, again, is Pakistan taking control of its own territory. Pakistan needs to exercise effective sovereignty over its own land, and then these problems will be resolved.
So, talking about sovereignty over its own land and the whole idea that there may be less troops in Afghanistan than they were planned to be. Pakistan's, Mr. Sartaj Aziz, Pakistan's de facto foreign minister, has said that Pakistan doesn't want to interfere in Afghanistan, but then it can only do so if no other neighboring countries interfere.
Well, if I can jump in here, I think it depends on what you were talking about in terms of the involvement of other countries. For instance, India. I think the U.S. and Pakistan have a difference over how they see India's view in Afghanistan. From the U.S. perspective, India is supporting the same people that the U.S. is supporting. They're supporting democracy. They're, providing humanitarian aid, and the Afghans, by and large, are very welcoming of the Indian support, and they have good relations, and every time there's a poll taken, the Afghans have very positive feelings toward India because of that interaction. So I think you need to talk about what kind of engagement. Yes, there should be no support to lethal groups, groups that are fighting and killing each other. But we, as I think David was saying, we have not seen any evidence of India supporting groups that are attacking and killing other people in Afghanistan. So I think you need to look at the kind of support, and that the best way, if Pakistan wants to have influence in Afghanistan, the best way it can do that is by building a positive relationship with the country, by engaging economically, by allowing exchanges. I think the days of supporting lethal groups in order to try to assert your influence in a country are simply over.
Now, one thing that worries, that Pakistanis claim that worries them is Indian training of Afghan military forces. They've said, we've offered to train them. They never come to us. Why do they always go to India? I want both of you to take that.
Well, I think that's pretty easy to answer. Okay, if you are going to allow your military to be trained by another country, it needs to be a country that you have faith is not undermining your own government. I think there's a lot of suspicion in Afghanistan, that, not only suspicion, I think there probably is evidence with the Afghan intelligence that Pakistan is supporting the Taliban, the Haqqani network, and other groups that are directly undermining Afghan security. So why in the world would a country agree to have its military forces trained by another country that it feels is directly undermining its own security?
And
I would add that the point that Lisa made is really, really important to understand. It's that lack of trust. Afghan people in general, the Afghan military in particular, doesn't have very much trust for Pakistan. Polls show repeatedly that Afghans blame Pakistan for almost every problem in Afghanistan. Just as I said before, it's an unfortunate myth in Pakistan that India is responsible for Pakistan's problems. It's an unfortunate myth in Afghanistan that Pakistan is responsible for Afghanistan's problems. Afghans have a lot of things that they have to correct in their own society, and they don't need to spend as much time as they do blaming Pakistan for their ills. Afghanistan needs to focus on Afghanistan, and Pakistan needs to focus on Pakistan, and then they can build trust. Before military training can happen, as Lisa said, you need to have that trust. And unfortunately, there's a long way to go.
Let's talk about what happens to U.S. counterterrorism efforts if there are no troops or very few troops. Starting with you, what happens to the drone program?
Well, I think that's a great question, because part of the issue is if the U.S. does not have troops on the ground, is will it be able to conduct drone strikes out of Afghanistan, or will it need to identify new bases of operations, maybe Central Asia or some of the Gulf countries? So I think that that is a major question. Now, you could make the argument that the U.S. will have to rely more on the drones if it doesn't have troops on the ground fighting in Afghanistan. And this, of course, is Vice President Biden has talked about this option, relying on special forces teams to conduct raids and more drone strikes to address the counterterrorism challenges in the region. So I think these are all questions that people are asking. We simply don't have the answers yet, but the planning must occur, because the fact of the matter is, particularly if the U.S. does pull all its forces out, the challenges in Afghanistan and Pakistan remain and will probably get worse. And the U.S. needs a plan to deal with the terrorism challenges that will remain.
Are there any neighboring countries that have offered? I mean, what planning is going on at this point?
I don't think there's any particular planning going on that realm, because, as I said, I believe the BSA will be signed. So I don't think this is a particularly urgent issue at all. However, what I would point out is that there would be no need for any type of such action if Pakistan controlled its own territory. So that's, I think, needs to be the focus for the Pakistani government, for the Pakistani audience, is getting control of Pakistan. Because if Pakistan had control, then no one would have to do anything except let the Pakistani security services do their job of protecting their country from Al-Qaeda, from the Lashkar-e-Taiba, from the other groups that threaten outside. Last month, or actually earlier this month, Sartar Aziz, who you mentioned earlier, was in the United States, and he was very clear. He said Pakistan has no interest in supporting groups that threaten its neighbors. That is tremendous. That's a tremendously important statement. And as Lisa said, if those groups can be controlled inside Pakistan, then I think the future is very bright.
What about counterterrorism inside Afghanistan? What happens to those activities if there are, let's say, only 3,000 U.S. troops there?
I think in terms of the counterterrorism activities inside of Afghanistan, existing forces that we have built up with continued U.S. advice and help, which will continue because, as I said, there will be a BSA, that will be sufficient to take care of that as it has been able to the last 11, 12 years. The real issue in terms of terrorism over the last 10, 12 years, of course, has not been inside Afghanistan. It's been from inside Pakistan.
Well, David seems more optimistic about Afghanistan, Lisa. In the last 1 minute of the show, if you had, a mirror, if you were looking into the future, what do you see?
Yeah, I'm nervous. I'm nervous because, as I indicated to you earlier, I'm not sure that our White House is committed to leaving the number of troops that will be necessary to stabilize the situation. And if the U.S. doesn't set an example, the NATO countries won't follow suit. And then I'm worried about the aid that will continue to go in. So I think we are looking at a shaky situation. It's unpredictable. And, unless the U.S., commits those forces to remaining, unless the Afghan government agrees to a BSA, then I am nervous about the future, and I'm not as confident as David that the BSA will come through.
Well, thank you so much. Our time today is up. It was a very interesting discussion. Hopefully I'll have both of you back as situation develops. We had Lisa Curtis, who's a Senior Research Fellow for South Asia at the Heritage Foundation, and we had David Sedney, who's a former Assistant Secretary of State at the Pentagon, and he dealt with South Asia, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Central Asia. Thank you for watching. Join us again for another episode of Access Point next week. See you. Goodbye.